So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to officially introduce the Leader of the Official Opposition and the Ontario NDP, Andrea Horwath.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. You notice we got the memo on the clothing, Karen. Bonjour tout le monde. I want to first say that I'm really happy to be here with you all today and let you know that I started off my day in Bracebridge touring some of the flood-damaged parts of the community. It was quite horrifying. And I know that there are lots and lots of folks who are having a really, really difficult time over this last week and will be continuing to have a very, very difficult time over the weeks and months to come. And so as the leader of the official opposition, I just thought it was important to acknowledge that and to tell folks that we'll be there with you on the entire journey as we try to pick up from the disaster that's occurred. As well as thank all of those folks that have been engaged in trying to mitigate the damage that's been ongoing for the last number of days. The military has been amazing. The reservists have been fantastic. Emergency Measures Ontario, the municipal leadership, public health. It's been quite an effort, both here in these communities, as well as in Ottawa. Now Renfrew County as well. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. I think it's important that we thank those folks and thank them constantly for the work that they do for us. I also want to begin by acknowledging that we are gathered today on the J. Collins land purchase and Williams Treaty lands, which are the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, specifically the Ojibwe, the Chippewa, and the Odawa peoples. I want to thank Rocco for inviting me here as the Chamber often does. I want to thank Karen for the introduction, and I want to thank all of you for the leadership that you provide on behalf of Ontario's business community. I want to thank you for the work that you do as well in trying to move our province forward. I know you've been very engaged with all governments and all parties, frankly, over the years. I think it's really important work, and I'm looking forward to continue to work with you as we traverse the next number of months and years. I want to thank also the sponsors of today's event for making it possible for us to get together for this discussion. It has been my absolute pleasure as leader of the NDP and the official opposition to work with chambers of commerce and boards of trade around Ontario. You are critical partners in building Ontario's prosperity. I know that everyone here today shares a vision and an understanding of the many challenges that face our province. We share amongst us a commitment to building a strong, prosperous, thriving Ontario, both for today, but also for generations to come. And while we don't always agree on exactly how we should get there, I know it's a core vision that we can all get behind. Over years of meeting with the Ontario Chamber of Commerce and chambers across our province, you have always emphasized to me a fundamental principle. Government must be serious about its role in providing a stable environment for commerce to thrive. It's a simple thing to ask for. You want a province where government is predictable, transparent, and accountable, where decisions about the things that drive our economy don't seem arbitrary, where investors and businesses of all sizes and all sectors have fewer shocks, fewer surprises to contend with. A province where people don't have to worry about what the government's going to do next, because there's a clear plan backed up by solid research, data, and evidence, and everyone, businesses, investors, workers, know what to expect over the next 5 weeks and next 5 years. Now, I hate to state the obvious, but I don't think that's what we're seeing out of the Doug Ford government. And I don't think it's what we saw in Mr. Ford's first budget. Now, obviously, no surprise here, I'm not a conservative, and so I did expect this budget to be disappointing. In fact, I expected it to be painful for a lot of people. But what I did not expect, what I was completely stunned by, was the total lack of a coherent vision for our province and where we're headed. The fact of the matter is, if you don't work in alcohol or gaming, if you don't make license plates, if you don't have an interest in bringing a private U.S. university to Ontario, this budget is not focused on your priorities. And it's not going to make things better for you. Ford's first budget decimates economic development, job creation, and trade with a cut of $185 million. It slashes $700 million from colleges, universities, and skills training. It eliminates $290 million of the last government's infrastructure commitments and rips over $500 million out of the Ministry of Energy, Northern Development, and Mines. But ironically, this budget is also a big spending budget. In his first budget, Mr. Ford managed to spend $5 billion more than Kathleen Wynne's last budget while cutting social services, squeezing patients and students, and walking away from critical business development. That's because Doug Ford is spending on the wrong things. You know, over many years, I've had the chance to speak with business owners, with investors, regulators, economic development organizations. In fact, many of you in this room have spoken with me about the need for educating, retraining, and attracting a stable, skilled workforce. We've had spirited discussions about the need to get overhead costs like hydro down and what the best ways are to do that. But no one, not one business owner, not one investor, none of you in this room has ever said to me, Andrea, you know what will really grow our economy and create quality jobs? Border signs and license plates, forcing gas stations to put stickers on gas pumps. This stuff isn't serious. It's not what people voted for, and it's not what people expect from their government. You know, the budget isn't just lacking and incoherent without a vision. It actually makes life worse for people. Squeezing healthcare to below the rate of inflation will only lead to more people suffering in a healthcare system that was once world-class and can be world-class again, but has been left hanging by a thread. It'll create longer waits and even more patients stacked in hallways. To not fund healthcare even to the rate of inflation is very, very wrong-headed. But we all know that healthcare inflation runs much, much higher than the regular inflation, right? I mean, healthcare inflation runs between 4% and 6%. Our financial accountability officer said at 4%, we could maintain a broken system at the level that it was currently operating. This government's funding healthcare increases over the next couple of years at 1.6%. We're in for some big trouble, and this is at a time when the government's upending our healthcare system and trying to turn it into something else. Doug Ford's budget also squeezed funding for public schools below the rate of inflation. It slashes valuable courses, electives, and programs for kids, and fires thousands of teachers and education workers all the time that we're supposed to be trying to help kids get better at math. Now, you know, you got to think about that. If we want kids to get better at math, we shouldn't be firing their math teachers. You know, far too often, decisions in Ontario these days feel like they're very disjointed. Things seem to be based on who has Mr. Ford's ear at any given time, which means we see a patchwork of schemes, from ripping up contracts in the green energy sector and passing laws to stop businesses from suing for breach of contract, to meddling in Hydro One to settle old political scores. This makes it harder for everyone to do business. It undermines the confidence because nobody knows what's going to happen next. And in the end, Ontarians are the ones paying. Just look at the $200 million in fines and penalties for Doug Ford's decision to meddle in Hydro One. Or look at the credit rating downgrade Mr. Ford earned for the province. Or look at the Bank of Canada's economic outlook. It had to be slashed in half because of Doug Ford's first budget, according to Governor Stephen Poloz. So let me be clear. Churning out new license plates, new license plate slogans, and signs at the border won't move us forward as a province. And neither will threatening small businesses with a $10,000 a day fine if they don't display stickers on gas pumps. And I want to thank you, by the way, for being vocal about that particular issue. You know, I believe the best path forward is rooted in some pretty basic fundamentals: predictability, transparency, collaboration, and accountability. Because businesses should be able to trust that the contracts they sign with the government will be upheld, and investors should look at Ontario as a safe bet. Investors should be able to trust that the province will not only uphold its end of the bargain, but create opportunities for us to become more and more competitive in the global economy. And that includes consistent, substantial investment in education and training, from giving elementary and high school students the opportunity to thrive, to making sure that post-secondary education costs don't hold young people back. That means expanding Ontario's capacity for research, innovation, and excellence by investing in colleges and universities. It also means the government needs to ensure that we're not only being vigilant in protecting our public health care system, but actually coming to the table with a vision for how to move us all forward. Just imagine if we were to expand Medicare to include drug and dental benefits for Ontarians. It's not only going to make people healthier and stop them from ending up in our ERs in the first place, but it's also going to take employee prescription drug costs off of the ledgers of businesses, generating an estimated $800 million in annual savings. It'll make Ontario an even more attractive place to invest. And it'll help our province attract and retain the best workers in the world. And think of how critical sound infrastructure planning and investment is. Imagine a government that understood that ripping up existing transit plans doesn't just lead to years of delays for commuters or inflated costs for taxpayers or perpetuate the billions of dollars in annual economic loss that comes with gridlock on our highways, but also makes Ontario less attractive to investors. Imagine a government that worked to provide efficient, affordable transit, good roads and interconnected rail at the high level that we need, along with widespread broadband for rural and remote regions of our province. These are crucial investments. These are the very most important investments that will make Ontario's businesses more connected, more prosperous, and our province more desirable for investors. As leader of the NDP and of the official opposition, I believe Ontario can have a stable climate in which to invest and do business. And I have a vision for the future in which the government always holds up its end of the bargain and makes Ontario an even more attractive place to live, work, and invest. And I know these things don't happen without your input, without consultation, without listening. And that's why I'm here today as well, to listen to you, to work toward our common goal of a province that can attract the world's best and create more opportunity for everyone. And I know that if we work together, we can make great things happen in our province. And so I'm looking forward to the fireside chat, the discussion portion of the meeting today, or of my time here with you. I want to thank you for your kind attention to my formal remarks. So merci beaucoup, miigwech, and let's get on to the main event. Thank you.
Do you want to join us over here in the Game of Thrones? First off, Andrea, thank you very much for taking time out of a very busy schedule, and I want to salute you for redoing your entire schedule to spend the day visiting and touring the flood-damaged areas, talking to people, and maybe before we get to the others, you know, one or two stories that stand out from today and what you were hearing from people on the ground.
Well, I mean, first and foremost, thanks for acknowledging that. It was it was something I felt I had to do, and so I had my team put together a tour, and I was very honored, frankly, to have the Canadian military take me around in a couple of tanks. So off the side, that was really cool. Riding in a tank, I took some selfies so my son can see them. But I mean, in all seriousness, we were riding in tanks because there were some areas that were so inaccessible from the flooding and the water damage that that was the safest way to get around. So it was pretty devastating. There were of course, and some folks in this room know this all too well and all too personally, but there were just swaths and swaths of places that used to be land that were now water. You know, you would look and there would be this vastness of water, and then you'd see a house or cottage in the distance and realize, oh, that water is not supposed to be there. That was these people's expansive front lawn kind of thing. So that was pretty frightening. Washed out roads, closed roads. There had been a road that the town of Bracebridge had built back up with all kinds of, large stone kind of thing to try to get some accessibility and prevent the roads from being inaccessible. But I did talk to a gentleman whose home or his cottage had been surrounded by sandbags. But had that not happened, he would have been completely underwater. And just as we were arriving in that area, 2 hours prior to us being there, a house had actually fallen in to the river. So it was devastating. And this gentleman happens to be from Grimsby, which is not too far from where I am, works at Dofasco, a great company in Hamilton. And he was telling me that so I was looking, and there was just water everywhere, was water, and he was telling me that this particular area that we were looking out over was where last summer his daughter had her wedding in beautiful tents and on the grass, and people's sense of humor gets them through. So he said, lucky she didn't plan her wedding for this year. Yeah, I mean, it's hard, and people are at the end of their wits, right? I mean, people are stressed. There's lots of anxiety. There's lots of worry, and we all know when the water eventually goes, it's not like it's all over. Then there's the cleanup and the rebuilding and the worry about whether insurance will get covered and how people are going to be able to afford to rebuild. And I was in Ottawa a couple of days ago, and one of the things that's on Sunday, I guess it was, one of the things that was different here is that there are many people who live in quite remote rural areas that are flooded out. And so those folks have an even different challenge. There's some places where there's, the laneway and a bunch of cottages in one area. But there are these other folks who are, who live in rural communities that are completely underwater, and that's where the Army was working very hard with the municipalities to try to do the check-ins to make sure people were okay. It's pretty devastating, and it's disorienting when you're standing in a spot. And you see all these, cottages or houses, and all you see is water everywhere. It's very, very disorienting. It's quite a disaster.
Well, thank you for doing that again, and thank you for sharing that with us. I've always found your humanity to be one of your greatest strengths, and that was a good example of it. While you were doing that, I do want to do a little bit of a commercial for the chamber for you, because while you were doing that, we were electing a new board going forward, and thanks to the efforts of a tremendous nominating and governance committee and really a single-minded focus on diversity and talent by our past chair, Graham Henderson, we've just elected a new board of 22, 12 of whom are women and 10 are men, which just goes to show that we don't believe in gender parity. We believe in going with the most talented people, and they happen to be women. So
I'm with you on that.
So we're delighted to be able to share that with you. You had underscored the theme of predictability, of transparency and no surprises, and it's something I share with chamber members often, and I want to do it whether you're here or not here, and that is, again, to thank you. You have, while we don't always agree, we're never surprised because you've always picked up the phone, whether it was Alan, me, and before any announcement, and we very much appreciate that, and I want to acknowledge that, and I know that our chambers respect that as well from you. And you also very rightly said, we don't always see eye to eye on issues, but like you and like your caucus that came to our advocacy day, many members of whom, and it was a very useful session, there are lots of areas where we do have things in common that we do want to work on together. Certainly broadband has been one of them, work in regional economic development. Maybe let's focus on a couple of those, and in your mind, what are the kind of key priorities where, knowing us and knowing where your priorities are coming from, we can work best together to help the government get to the right solution?
Well, I mean, I think you've named a couple of them, Rocco, but you're correct that there might be things that we don't see eye to eye on, but there are many pieces that we can work very closely on, and that we can continue to make sure that the government is not forgetting some of these important pieces. And one of the big efforts that we've been undertaking recently is a bit of a tour around the province, if you will, with John Vantoff, who's a deputy leader, or one of my deputy leaders, to talk about broadband access. And we know how important broadband access is, but we know that there are shocking numbers of people in this province and communities and areas in Ontario that don't have access to broadband. And so we know what a disadvantage that is for business, particularly, but also for communities, for children, for young people, for students. I mean, if the government's going to go ahead with this idea that 4 credits are going to have to be earned online, how is that going to be accomplished when there's little or no access to broadband in some communities? There are still a number of families that don't have computers, and they end up going to the libraries or the schools to get access to broadband, but even that's spotty. And so broadband's a great example. But infrastructure overall is another issue, and I know I mentioned it in my speech, but it's concerning when we know that there are plans that were almost ready to hit the ground when it came to the transportation network around the GTA, particularly expansion of the subway system. It was the Board of Trade that was for many years advocating for the for speeding up some solutions around gridlock, identifying that was it $6 billion annually in economic loss, or productivity loss that came as a result of gridlock. And so these things need to be addressed, and it doesn't help when the plans that are almost ready to be undertaken get ripped up and thrown out for a new plan to come in. So that's concerning. So the infrastructure piece, but whether it's infrastructure in the GTA, or whether it's northern highways, or whether it's interconnectivity of communities and regions. I mean, I think of places like Niagara. I think of places like the North, for example. There's a lot of work that needs to be done on infrastructure, and I think that some of the flooding that we're seeing today, or that we're talking about today, is also an indicator of us falling behind when it comes to addressing infrastructure. The other one, I think, that's a common one that, again, I'm very concerned about because I think the government's taken the wrong track, and I'm going to give you an example, is skilled trades and skilled workers. So, I mean, not surprising, I have a different view of the ratios when it comes to apprentices and all of that. Some of that for me is around safety, and I just met with the OPG yesterday and was talking about exactly that. I mean, when you think about the workers at the nuclear plants, you want to make sure they're have the top-notch training and have been exposed to top-notch tradespeople as they go through their apprenticeship program. But with the changes that the government's making to education, what we're hearing from school boards, and again, Mr. Ford gets up and the Minister of Education gets up and say that we're fear-mongering and that we're not being straight, but we are being straight up because we're getting the information from the school boards, and that information is that the very courses that will provide an introductory opportunity for young people in grade 7 and 8 and through high school, those are the courses that are at risk of being lost because they're the courses that are under-enrolled, right? So the under-enrolled courses are the ones that are going to be cut off the ledger, and people like OPG who are telling me they're going to go and speak to the high schools about providing more of these kinds of courses at the various boards. They're going to be told by those boards, we can't do it anymore. We can't do it anymore because we can't get 28 people enrolled in those classes. And so when there's 16 or 17 people in those classes get cut off the ledger. And those are trade introductory courses, they're tech courses, some of them are STEM courses. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So that's why I think that the folks like yourselves, the chambers, need to step up and start thinking about the unintended consequences, perhaps, that are coming from some of these decisions that the government's made. And again, it's not the official opposition. We get our information from somewhere. We get it from the boards of education. So that's an example of where I think we're going to be ending up going backwards at a time when we know that we have a crunch when it comes to the trades. In fact, the OPG was telling me that in 2023, I think it is, Darlington, Pickering, and Bruce are all going to be in some form of massive construction. Yeah. And they are very worried about how they're going to have access to the trades they need to get that work done.
Well, particularly you add the transportation that's on the book, let alone ongoing residential construction, and you really dry up quickly when you've got an average age of journeyman and pick the skilled trade in Ontario that's almost 60. But that's why the ratios had to change. And we need to work on a process, and that's something we very much look forward to working with the NDP and the trade unions on, because they are right to point out that their record of graduating apprentices to journeymen is in the mid-90s versus the mid-50s for private sector, moving them along to a certificate of qualification. That said, the unionized shops tend to be the larger ones that have HR capacity, that have the overhead structure that helps do the paperwork and the rest, that is harder for the vast majority of our members who are small and medium-sized businesses that aren't unionized shops and that need the help to be able to steward that apprenticeship process more effectively. So we'll definitely be coming on that front. You did raise the issue of the credit rating drop, and when you talk to the gnomes, what they want is a plan to balance. They want debt and deficits down. That's what brings your credit rating up. You made the point that this government has made the decision to slow healthcare spending to 1.6%, effectively being the growth of the economy. They've ratcheted it to the to economic growth. If you're going to bump that to 4 or 5 or 6, if 4 only gets you the crickety system we have and 6 is what we need, when it's already 40+% of the budget, how do we deal with the deficit and debt and deal with those credit rating people under a new Democratic government if you're going to take the single largest item and double the rate of spending on it?
Well, in fact, it wouldn't be double the rate of spending, because the rate of spending has been growth.
Of growth.
So here's the thing that I think is what we have to keep our eye on, and that's time frames, right? I mean, one of the things that is worrisome is you're not going to get the revenue coming in if the cuts that you're making are slowing your economy. So you have to look at all of those pieces. So one of the unintended consequences of all of the cuts is, or maybe it was an intended consequence, is that slows economic growth and that reduces revenues. And I've never been shy to say it, and I'm going to say it again. I don't think that if you're really serious about reducing the deficit and getting eventually to ratcheting down the accumulated debt, that you cut taxes for the rich. I don't think you do that. I'm sorry. I mean, I know folks in this room might be unhappy to hear that, but you also know I'm a New Democrat. I mean, one of the first things the government did in the fall economic statement was reduce taxes for the wealthiest amongst us. Now, I don't have a problem, reducing the tax burden on people who do spend most of their disposable income in the local economy, because we know that that's beneficial. But there was no need to also then make reductions for the highest income amongst us. And so my idea, or my vision, is one where we use the word balance a lot, but you got to look at both sides of the ledger. You do have to look at both sides of the ledger. And when we now have a government that has basically told municipalities who have been begging. Municipalities have been begging the provincial government for some time now to help them to be able to meet the needs in their communities. Well, you have to have partners in municipalities if you're going to be able to make regional economies stronger and get some economic boost there. In fact, at AMO, the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, they were asking us, prior to the last election, to increase the HST by 1% and give that all to the municipalities. And this government is cutting massively. I mean, municipalities are now even further behind than they were, and it's troubling. And so again, you have to think not only of what you're doing, with your expenditures, and we all know, and I think we are all in agreement, that the last government was very irresponsible and disappointing when it came to the way that they were using public money. So I get that, and I don't think that there's a magic wand where all of a sudden there's all of this opportunity to to come up with where the government overspent. But we do know that they did not do a good job in their oversight of the public purse, if you will. But I believe you have to be very cautious as you try to get the deficit down and deal with the accumulated debt, because you end up causing more damage, in the long run if you're not more cautious about that. And I think actually the Chamber's actually in your report identified that as a risk. Yeah,
For
absolutely.
Sure. One last question, because we're running sadly short of time. You mentioned AMO, you mentioned the regional economic development. As you saw in our Ontario economic report that pulled some critical analysis, and one of our analysts, Claudia DeSantis, working on a report with respect to regional economic development. It really is a tale of two Ontarios. The Greater Golden Horseshoe over the last 15 years has had significant employment and economic growth. Northern Ontario -5 in terms of labor growth in the last 15 years. You take Ottawa out of Eastern Ontario and you basically come to similar measures. What in your mind are the one or two key things that need to be focused on if we're going to get serious about bridging that divide?
Well, I mean, I think one of the things, kind of writ large, we already spoke about, which is infrastructure. But the other thing is ensuring that they are apparently, when I hear from my MPPs, so I have MPPs, it's kind of possessive, I guess I shouldn't say my MPPs, but I do have MPPs that are...
in the Game of Thrones, the person on the throne, it's their MPPs.
Okay, I hear that. That's good. No, but they tell me that it's shocking when they go back home to their communities and see the number of help wanted signs. I mean, there are businesses that are desperate for workers in many parts of rural and northern Ontario, and they in fact, the FNOM, which is the Federation of Northern Municipalities for kind of the northeast of the province, were saying that they want to see immigration. I mean, they want Ontario to bring new immigrants and have them come to the north. To work in the north and try to rejuvenate some of those communities. I think that's something we have to look at, but I don't think we've done a good job even thus far of hearing what those folks are saying. And of course, the risk is that as those towns hollow out as their economies continue. It's a downward spiral, right? Their economies shrink. There's less opportunity. Young people come south for for school maybe, or come south for a job, and the next thing you know, there's no property tax base left. Right? There's no industrial or commercial tax base left, and the cities and towns start to shrivel and die off, and that is not a positive thing. And so we need to look at things like, how do we get immigrants to help stabilize some of the employment needs there. The infrastructure piece is extremely important. We also have to look at how can we help stimulate the economic development vision of those regions. And I mean, I'm a big supporter of the corridor model, but I mean, a lot of that's been done in the south here, Toronto to Kitchener, and those kinds of pieces. We need to think, I think, outside the box about how do we achieve that in northern communities and economies as well. And if there's one last thing is the it's amazing to see the impact of resource development, not only in northern communities, but right in Toronto. I mean, a lot of jobs are in Toronto that are connected to the resource economy, but we still haven't got to a place where we have that relationship with First Nations that enables some of those resources to be unlocked and to benefit their communities as well as the North. And one of the things that's amazing to me is just the supply chain and the amount of businesses that have built in our province, expert businesses that work all around the world in industries like mining, and how much more of that we can be doing and fostering if we would only take the preparatory steps to build those relationships in a way that allows some of that opportunity to be unleashed.
Definitely another area that we can spend some time together. Yes, please. Thank you very much. I think what everyone sees, what everyone knows, is that there are lots of areas where we can and will be working together. And it's great that you ended with comments about the North. Next year's AGM just happens to be in. And so we ask you to save the date on that, and we'll be in many conversations before then. Megwitch, merci beaucoup. À la prochaine. Thank you so much.